Give folks a couple more minutes before we get into it. If you were at the last session, just a reminder, we are going to record this just so folks who are interested or don't quite know that they're interested yet can take advantage of the content. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in about 2 to 3 minutes. People are flowing in. This is great. Thank you all. Okay, welcome everybody. We'll give it about another minute before we get into it. Hope all the Connecticut folks didn't have any issues driving in. Apparently Voldemort is outside. Oh. Okay, let's get into it. So again, for the 11th time, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Brendan Colbert. I am the training program coordinator at Advancing Connecticut Together. I'm also the person who probably emails you more than most humans. So it's nice to put a lot of faces to the names. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. This one is called Expanding Employment Opportunities for People Living with HIV in the Greater Hartford Area. Keep
Hi,
in mind,
Brendan.
yes.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Wow. Okay. That is. Is anybody else having issues hearing me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can. All right, Ruth, we'll look into that. But this is facilitated by the National Working Positive Coalition. I will allow them to introduce themselves. Please utilize the chat if you are able to and comfortable to. We'd love to see your face. We respond to all of the reactions and all that good stuff. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. So, Mark Sylvester, I will give the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you all for joining today's webinar presented by Advancing Connecticut Together with funding support from the City of Hartford's H.O.P.W.A allocations, making this employment initiative for people living with HIV in Hartford possible. My name is Mark Misrock, and I serve as Executive Director for the National Working Positive Coalition. I use he and they pronouns, and I'm also a long-time HIV survivor myself, who's navigated many of the service systems, programs, and policies we'll discuss today. in my own journeys in and out and back into employment.
Fucking annoying.
Oh, I hear somebody. Was that a question? Oh, sorry. We greatly appreciate you all joining us today to learn more about expanding opportunities for people living with HIV in Greater Hartford. I'm deeply grateful for this privilege to work with people who choose to better understand this information with the potential of contributing meaningfully to enhance the health and quality of life of other people living with HIV. This makes participating in this webinar for me feel like entering an oasis in these very complicated and often troubling and difficult times. In today's webinar, we're going to provide an overview of some key information to understand the meaning of supporting people living with HIV and considering options to pursue self-determined goals to engage in employment, and a range of resources available in the Greater Hartford area to address barriers to employment and to facilitate pursuit of employment. I encourage you not to expect to become an expert from this training, but rather to benefit in your work from a better general understanding of both the challenges and opportunities to participate in employment for people living with HIV, and resources for additional information and advisement. We'll also greatly appreciate your full participation in our very simple and brief polls and exercises during today's webinar. And we'll especially be grateful to each of you if you can plan to take a brief moment to complete our super brief webinar evaluation survey before you move on with your day. We'll share the link to that in chat during our presentation. And with that, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. We welcome you all and very much appreciate you joining us today. We also have these few requests of participants. We need to ask your assistance to be able to create attendance records for the funders of this initiative. And as the instructions just posted in chat show, please change your Zoom account name to your name and your pronouns with both your first and last name. Please do keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking, although we'll absolutely appreciate you coming off mute and coming on camera to participate in discussion and Q&A at various points throughout the webinar, if you so choose. We also very much welcome you to submit questions and comments in the chat box throughout the presentation. We're going to try to answer questions as we go, and as well with any time available at the end of the presentation. And again, please do help us in a very important way by completing our brief evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. Our objectives for this greatly appreciated time with you this morning are all focused on strengthening our collective systemic and individual responses to the employment-related needs for information, services, and resources of people living with HIV in the Hartford area in 2024. This session has been designed so participants can gain a deeper understanding of key employment-related issues and challenges, consider the potential meaning it may have in the lives of people living with HIV for you to provide support for considering work, and become familiar with key resources that are currently available in the Hartford area to address a wide range of employment-related needs.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mark. My name is Sylvester Askins Jr., and I have the pleasure of serving as the training director at the National Working Positive Coalition. Before this position, I served as the director of health at the Urban League of Hampton Roads, where I oversaw their Ryan White program, And previous to that, I ran a Ticket to Work program at a Center for Independent Living in Norfolk, Virginia, and I am a trained benefits counselor. Mark and I collaborate as leading the training team for the National Working Positive Coalition, or NWPC. And we are honored to be working with the amazing team who convened for this employment initiative for people living with HIV in Greater Hartford. The National Working Positive Training Program was launched in September 2019 to provide training and technical assistance services to build the capacity of HIV service providers to identify and address employment-related needs of people living with HIV. These needs may simply be for access to information to be able to make well-informed decisions considering work, or linkage to employment services, training, education, benefits counseling, legal services, or financial assistance to move forward on goals for working. Let me just stop 1 second. I want to just add that I understand that I probably sound really, really nasally. I want to apologize for the way I sound. My sinuses are really, really acting up, and no matter what I take, I don't seem to get any relief. So I want to apologize in advance for the way I sound.
You sound great.
Today's webinar is the second in the H.O.P.W.A Workforce Project for people living with HIV in Greater Hartford. Mark also represented us in the presentation of a half-day in-person training for HIV service providers last month, and will again participate in an in-person employment event for people living with HIV in Greater Hartford on June 7th. As we are still a new initiative, we'll welcome your feedback to inform our future training and technical assistance activities, including in our super brief webinar evaluation we'll ask you to complete at the end of the webinar. And now we'll go back to Mark.
Sylvester, thanks so much. I'm really sorry you're struggling with allergies. It seems like it's been a bad allergy season.
Thank you, Mark.
This spring. I am just extremely lucky to work with Sylvester Askins Jr. as our training director in the National Working Positive Coalition, and my incredible training partner in our training activities. We're both really excited about the plans that have been taking shape for this project's first in-person employment event for people living with HIV, which is going to take place, on Friday, June 7th, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Bennett Building. The address is here on the slide. We're also going to share a flyer about this event with you in an email soon after we complete this webinar today. In this event, we will have a mix of information, discussions, socializing, and access to representatives of key resources at this event. Lunch will also be provided and is being made possible with the support of ViiV Healthcare. We're also going to have a light breakfast during registration, which will start at 9:30. And we welcome all people living with HIV across the Greater Hartford area, as well as case managers accompanying any of the folks that you're working with. It is important for a registration to be completed for each person attending this opportunity for people living with HIV to learn about available strategies and resources that may match their interests and needs, and unlock doors to pursue goals they'd like to set for themselves and improve their quality of life. And on the flyer, there's a QR code that you'll get after this webinar, and here is a shortened web link on the slide, which also works going to the Eventbrite registration page. And that'll be important for us to have a good catering count, and really appreciate folks completing that. Now I'll turn it back over to Sylvester.
Thank you, Mark. Excuse me. Both Mark and I have traveled a journey living with HIV with a variety of services and resources related to employment having major importance to our own quality of life. I am a long-term survivor of 34 years, diagnosed in Washington, D.C. in 1990. Uh, at the time of my diagnosis, I was working for the Bureau of National Affairs in Washington, D.C., and had a really, really great career trajectory planned for my life. After my diagnosis, I went on disability. I've been on disability twice, but employment was always something that was very, very important to me. And I have used many of the resources that we'll talk about today, including benefits counseling, the Ticket to Work program, extended Medicare, and some other things. But it's just been always been really, really important for me that I have employment. Part of it is for my mental well-being, my social well-being, and of course, my economic stability. And now I'll turn it over to Mark to share about some of his own experiences and observations.
Lester, I appreciate it. Thank you. I am also a long-term HIV survivor. I've been living with HIV at least since 1984. And it was when I was a very young man that the HIV epidemic began to emerge, and we began to be very aware of it and extremely frightened by it in the 80s. And I really lived throughout that decade, really expecting that I would get sick and I would be one of the folks that would get sick and experience the horrors we were seeing that were most extreme before the medications became available that were effective in the mid to late 90s. And so throughout the 80s, I had dropped out of college. I didn't have a degree. I really didn't have work skills, quite honestly. And because of my expectation of getting sick, I had no vision of the future whatsoever. So I was just living to get through the day. And I would take little jobs that would help me keep my minimal roof over my head and just cover basic bills, and never a thought about a career or building towards anything, any future goals. In the late 80s, I took a job in 1988. In July of 1988, I started working as a cab driver where I lived in San Francisco at the time, and thought it would be an interesting adventure with flexibility and limited investment of my time and energy and focus. And having started that job in July of 1988, it was kind of fun and an adventure for the first few months. But as I continued in that job, I was lucky because my health was not declining at the rate so many folks were, which also meant that I wasn't eligible to go on to disability benefits and needed to work to survive. And I began to increasingly feel trapped in that job because I didn't have skills or work experience that really created alternatives that were better. And actually, at that time, the money I was able to make as a cab driver was the best money that I could figure out how to earn. I ended up growing progressively more depressed, partly because of the struggle living with HIV in those days, and maybe partly also a personal tendency towards depression based on a variety of things and not taking good care of my health. I began to feel trapped in that job as a cab driver as it stopped being an adventure and started to become increasingly oppressive and really kind of heightened my depression. So it was not just HIV, but it was also increasingly severe depression that were major factors for me. And feeling trapped in that work, which did not feed my soul, and increasingly was related to my sense that I might just die behind the wheel of the cab, having done very little more than that as a contribution to the world during my days on this planet. I became extremely desperate to get help. At the exact point that I heard about the start by a group of volunteers of an employment program specifically created for people living with HIV in the San Francisco Bay Area. That was 1992. And I'll tell you that from being client number 92 in that program, one of the first folks to register, throughout the next several years, I embarked on what was a concept I wasn't even familiar with before, which was a vocational rehabilitation process, and utilized a whole range of these services we're going to talk about today and in our other activities in this project, which combine as really part of a local HIV employment services network to address the range of needs and barriers to employment and facilitators to employment needed by people living with HIV. It took me until 1995 to be able to climb out of that cab. It was a gradual process for me. I'd never touched a computer. I didn't know how to type with more than 2 fingers on a keyboard. I managed to develop a trusting rapport with my employment counselor, who assisted me in finding the motivation and hopefulness to take those basic steps for me at that time that began gradually to unlock my ability to see myself moving in other parts of the world of work other than that yellow taxi cab. I'm grateful because at that time there was an HIV specific employment program which allowed me to work with employment specialists who really had a very real understanding of the meaning of living with HIV and the impact it had on my own personal vocational development. But it was a struggle, and my struggle with hopelessness is one that unfortunately still many of us living with HIV in this country experience today, all these years later. And so it's because of that that I'm so grateful that everyone has tuned into this webinar today with at least some level of belief and hopefulness and willingness to try to incrementally build your own knowledge and awareness of opportunities and options and resources, so that we may increase the number of people living with HIV in the Hartford area who can get linked with support, encouragement, services, resources to consider at any pace they are ready and willing to take, and to pursue goals that they set for themselves at any pace and readiness they would assign to it for themselves. And with that, I just want to thank Brendan Colbert and the Advancing Connecticut Together agency for making this project possible. I'm super excited to work with Sylvester and the team to help support advances in the service delivery within Hartford and the access to information services and resources for people living with HIV, all people living with HIV in Hartford. Next slide, please. If any of you in the webinar today came to our in-person event last month, you may remember I shared this slide in that event as well. And since I first found this figure published online by the CDC, I quite honestly have been entirely haunted by it. What you see here is data from the CDC's long-standing annual HIV surveillance data survey research project, which is called the MMP, or the Medical Monitoring Project. These data are from their most recent annual report, which was from the data they collected from June of 2021 through May of 2022. The data collected and reported on in the MMP is intended annually to refresh a portrait of people living with HIV in the United States each year. As you see in this figure, reporting on the prevalence of this collection of socioeconomic factors and incarceration among adults with diagnosed HIV in the United States, there's just an extraordinarily high rate of people living with HIV outside of the workforce. 39% of people identified as unemployed or unable to work. This would be a very high rate for any population to be outside of the workforce, and to me seems especially high this far into the era of improved HIV care and treatment. Let's now try to explore some of the dynamics at play here, as we also note in this figure how at 38%, the rate of poverty, probably unsurprisingly, very closely matches the rate at 39% of people living with HIV outside of employment. Now I'll turn it back over to Sylvester.
Excuse me, I was on mute. This slide reflects some of the societal context for the focus of the National Working Positive Coalition's mission and activities. You may well have already recognized that key societal factors have driven disparities in vulnerability to HIV and HIV care outcomes, as well as, excuse me, as well as in access to employment and economic opportunities. Primary among these factors is racism, along with sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, which is the bias against immigrants, poverty, and HIV stigma, which continues to be powerful and devastating for many people even to this day. HIV service providers and other service providers who engage in addressing employment needs help level the playing field in the labor market for individuals and communities when that playing field is not level for them and never has been. Next slide, please. HIV service providers from the beginning of the epidemic to the present have always worked to assemble all of the information, services, and resources to improve the quality of life of people living with HIV, even when they had very few effective tools and strategies for trying to do so. We now have so much more knowledge and so many more effective tools and strategies available. And one of the most powerful ways we can reduce the harm that HIV does to individuals and families' quality of life and well-being is helping link people living with HIV with employment-related information, services, resources, and encouragement to consider them. So please now let's take a moment to really consider this question from your own life and work experience. What role has employment played in your own physical, mental, and economic health and well-being? Please use the raise your hand feature to speak coming off mute. You could also enter your responses in the Zoom chat, although we're hoping to hear from some of you share some of your own stories. So, over the course of your working years, what has employment meant to your physical, mental, and economic health and well-being? Would someone please come off mute and share their experience?
I can go. I'll start it off.
Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, no problem. I was just writing a dissertation in the chat. Employment has been both savior and oppressor to me since I began working. It's one of the few things in our life that we need to function in modern day society, but you know, if we're lucky, we like our jobs. Like I assume a lot of people do, at least on this call. But us liking it really is of no consequence to the necessity of it. So it weighs a lot on your mental health, both positively and negatively. So that's been my experience.
Thank you, Brendan. I really appreciate you
Okay.
sharing that. Is there someone else who would be willing to come off mute and share your own experience?
I can share my experience. Unfortunately, you can't see my face because my camera is acting up.
Okay.
Hang on, I'm gonna try.
It's it's okay if you can't get your
my-
camera on.
Yep. So, being a person who has been both employed and unemployed, I would say that, you know, to feel like a productive member of society, and I think this is something that is drilled into us when we are children, employment makes us feel more confident. It makes us feel mentally more stable, because of our role in society and what we're taught our role is in society. What it doesn't take into account is what is happening to our physical being, right? So our physical being may not be healthy, but because we have to work, we go to work. When an employer is done with us, right? They lay us off. It doesn't matter what our loyalties are, how much we love our job, how good we do our job. When there's a layoff, you're laid off. And then our mental health is affected because we're no longer, you know, considered a functioning part of society. And when you're unemployed, nobody wants to employ you. Okay, so it takes a longer time to get employment. And during that length of time it takes to get employment, your mental health starts deteriorating. You go into depression, right? And so it's like this cycle. You get a job again, you know, it takes you time to acclimate to the new culture of work, right? Because it's a different culture you're acclimating to. You make relationships, you know, whether you love or hate the job, you're functioning in society. When you leave your job, you know, you're making money. But then again, the employer's finished with you, and there you are, unemployed again. These are things that have happened to me. I've been part of like 3 layoffs, and then the pandemic came. And so it's really hard to weigh and juggle the mental, physical, and social obligations that we have. That's all I have.
Thank you so very much for that comment. We really appreciate you coming off mute, excuse me, and sharing your experience. Is there at least one more person who would also like to come off mute and share their experience?
I can get off and share my experience.
Sure.
For me, it's a sense of freedom. I have never been unemployed since I've been an adult in the workforce. And for me, it gives me a sense of financial independence to make decisions that I might not have otherwise been able to make if I wasn't employed. It gives me a sense of liberation, if you ask me, um, to, do whatever I think I should do for myself in some contexts. So, from a mental health standpoint, though, it does kind of weigh heavily sometimes because sometimes we tend to reach a little bit too far because we're employed. So we constantly have to be chasing the job to make sure that we can keep up to the levels that we think that we should be at as, vital members of the community.
Thank you so much for that comment. Also in chat, I hope I'm saying her name right. Nilda Fernandez said, my role in working in this field, I feel is my calling. I love what I do and often do not feel like it's work for me. My ability to work has sustained my economic well-being and has also contributed to my mental and social well-being. I've been blessed to work with a wonderfully committed team, which has made a world of difference because my team has become my extended family. Nilda had to jump off for another meeting, but we thank her very much for this comment. And as we see, there have been a myriad of experiences among the group around things that happen around employment, all of which are very, very valid and all of which can affect either negatively or positively our mental health, our well-being, and our economic stability. Thank you all for sharing your stories and comments. We will move on now, but please consider adding any other stories or comments or questions in the chat. And with that, we'll go to Mark.
Well, thanks so very much. Really appreciate it, Ruth and Nilda and Brendan, for each of you sharing very real and meaningful snapshots from from your own experience and as a worker in work. One thing that I just want to say that occurs to me in listening to these and hearing these is how all work is not good work. Someone going to work in itself should not be considered, okay, that's a absolutely positive, successful outcome. I think that as a collective services system that really is centered on the best interests and well-being of people living with HIV, I think that a successful outcome related to employment is for individuals to be fully equipped to make well-informed decisions about employment and set up with all possible support and resources to pursue the most ideal employment possible. And I know that in my own life as a younger person, I certainly didn't feel like that was realistic to have available to me. There were many, many years when I didn't think I really had a lot of choice about what jobs I took. I didn't have skills. I didn't feel competitive for anything that would really be something that I particularly want to do. And so I did jobs I had to do. And so I'm hoping that out of this initiative, we share a goal of really helping folks get connected with information to make decisions about whether to work or not based on an understanding of the full range of options and potential strategies and resources they could consider, and also to feel an ability, which for a lot of folks might be for the first time in their lives, to really strategize to pursue something that they'd actually want to be doing in work, and not to think that any specific job situation is their only option, and that they have to take it and stay in it, and really to encourage folks to feel hopeful about being able to move into other options that better match what is best for them and what may really match their own preferences and values and needs. I really appreciate everybody sharing, and I'm sorry, Sylvester, I went on so long with my own thoughts. It's essential together for us together to consider support programs and benefits in making these well-informed decisions that I referred to and will often refer to as highest value in this work related to employment. It's important to understand that these decisions are important to economic security, to housing, and access to healthcare and medication. These programs have helped many of us become able to work, and loss of access to them could undermine the wellness and security that may lead us to feel able to consider working in the first place. Each benefit program has its own eligibility criteria and policies related to work earnings, which are often called work incentives. For the vast majority of people living with HIV in this country, quite honestly, it's been very difficult to learn enough about the work incentive policies relevant for each of us individually for us to truly be equipped to make well-informed decisions about employment. For many of us, addressing legal issues may reduce some of the most important or the most important barriers to working that we face and increase our confidence to pursue employment. And I'll jump out for a second to share that for myself personally. Early in my journey, it was essential for me to get access to legal services to clear up many years of unpaid taxes. As I was driving a cab, I thought that I was going to get sick and die and didn't really think that it was that important to actually pay my taxes. And so I just kept my cash that was a mine at the end of each shift. And I didn't deal with any of that. I didn't think I was going to have to worry about it. And what that meant is that I felt trapped underground. I didn't feel able, after a few years, I felt really stuck. And unable to come above ground. And it was getting access to legal services to untangle my mess related to many years of unpaid, unfiled taxes, that I got help and was able to essentially come up with a settlement that was manageable for me at the time, to be able to clear up all of those years of unfiled taxes. And then I felt able to come above ground. That's just one example of a wide range of legal issues that folks may deal with. For many of us, addressing legal issues may reduce some of the most important or the most important barriers to working that we face. Some examples of legal issues are listed here that can be major factors in access to employment opportunities, including employment discrimination, history of criminal convictions or charges, immigration issues, credit and debt issues, drug testing, and confidentiality of medical information. You will likely recognize that SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, Medicare, H.O.P.W.A, and H.O.P.W.A are programs that many people living with HIV in the Hartford area are enrolled in and are vital to their health and well-being. People living with HIV are able to make more well-informed decisions about employment when we can understand the policies of each program related to work earnings, including when we would keep all or some cash benefits when working. For example, how to continue access to H.O.P.W.A or to Medicaid and or Medicare, even if work earnings reach a level where cash benefits end, and how work earnings will or will not affect a housing subsidy. I'll turn it back over to Sylvester.
Okay, so we've just presented a whole lot of information, and we understand that this can all be kind of overwhelming. So we're going to try a little experiment with some of our online training program. I'm going to ask each of you to either take a couple of really deep breaths, inhale and back out, or try standing up for just a second and doing a great stretch, or doing them both. You can inhale, exhale, and stretch right where you're sitting, right? So that we can give ourselves, our body, and our mind a quick break. And we always want to understand that self-care for each of us, that we include self-care for each of us as we most strongly advise for people living with HIV we work with. You know, so many times individuals doing this work are so concerned about the folk that we work with, we don't always take time for ourselves. And there's an old saying that says, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. So, hope we had a quick stretch and a quick breath. Now we're going to move on to the next slide, please. Today's webinar and our future webinars and trainings will especially zoom in to focus on these 7 primary resources available in the greater Hartford area that can be understood and utilized by HIV service providers, including peer workers, to link people living with HIV with vital services and resources to obtain optimal employment. Let's take a moment first to get a very quick snapshot of your use of some of these as referral sources for people living with HIV that you've worked with already. And now we're going to go to Mark for an exercise.
Sylvester, thank you. So now we have a question for your consideration, and we're going to ask everybody to enter answers in chat. We ask that you take a moment to participate in a quick poll. And in this poll, your response, of course, will be incredibly helpful to us. This is going to help us have a sense of what people are familiar with and have utilized in referrals and linkages in your work with people living with HIV. We're asking you to respond to this question. Have you ever referred a person living with HIV to a resource that would be part of your local Greater Hartford HIV Employment Services network? Please choose one or more of the following answers, choosing all that apply, and just put A, B, C, D, E, F, or any combination of them in chat. That'll be really great information for us that we'll harvest from today's webinar, and will really be helpful to us in future activities. So in the answer to the question, have you ever referred a person living with HIV to a resource? Please choose all that apply from A, to a Capital Workforce Partners American Job Center, B, to BRS, C, to Demas's Employment Services, D, to the Adult Education Center, E, to Capital Community College, or F, I haven't made a referral to one yet. And if you have any other employment-related referral that you have made that's not listed here, we'd tremendously appreciate you entering that in chat. We'd appreciate you entering your answers in chat. And let's see, I see that we're getting a bunch of answers in there.
Yeah,
let's see if there's a What do you see, Sylvester?
So I'm seeing A, B, D, and E. I'm seeing 4 for F. I'm seeing C and D, A and E, D and E. One person also said one that we don't have listed is the Veterans Administration for Employment.
Absolutely. Thank you. So it looks like folks have had experience with referring folks to several of these. It does look like there's especially a lot of folks who say they haven't made a referral to one yet, but there are folks who have made referrals. It looks like there's been somebody who's made referrals to all of them.
For each of them, yes.
Crystal, yeah, Crystal, I really appreciate you adding the VA for employment, which does have very specific employment programs, including vocational rehabilitation services for eligible vets as well. I really appreciate that. This is tremendously helpful for us. Thank you all for participating in the poll and sharing this information with us. If you haven't answered yet, we'll appreciate it if you do now. And otherwise, with that, Sylvester, why don't I go ahead and turn it back over to you?
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to everyone who responded. Now we're going to move through a brief overview of key service initiatives that can address many employment-related needs and interests of people living with HIV in communities all across the state. In this photo, you see just some of the magnificent people working in agencies, organizations, and institutions addressing employment, education, and training needs. We've been immensely gratified to find so many of them highly motivated and inspired to help address the impacts of HIV by working to welcome and support people living with HIV to connect with and fully benefit from their resources. It cannot be overstated how impactful and potentially therapeutic it can be for someone who's lived their lives without having receiving a high school diploma to succeed in obtaining one. The Adult Education Center is a great resource offering multiple strategies of support for people to obtain their diploma, including obtaining a GED, and also their National External Diploma Program, which can include credit for life experience. Other programs available through the Adult Education Center include English classes for speakers of other languages, as well as American citizenship classes. And now we'll go back to Mark.
The Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, or BRS, is the state of Connecticut's vocational rehabilitation agency. And there's a state folk rehab agency in every state and territory and the District of Columbia across the country. BRS can provide a wide variety of information, services, and resources to eligible people with disabilities to consider, prepare for, obtain, and maintain employment, as well as to advance in employment. BRS can provide access to and cover expenses that most of us would be unable to access otherwise, would be beyond our ability to afford, including critical training, education, services, equipment, supplies, and many other things essential to gaining employment desired by people living with HIV, that many eligible people living with HIV could not afford on their own. Anyone who receives SSI and or SSDI benefits from Social Security is automatically presumed eligible for BRS services, but you don't need to be receiving those to be determined eligible. Eligibility is based on having some physical, mental, cognitive, or other functional limitations that affect a person's ability to gain or maintain employment. BRS also houses an extremely vital program for people living with HIV. And it is for participants in their vocational rehabilitation services, as well as other beneficiaries of either SSI and or SSDI. Their Connect to Work program is staffed by certified benefit specialists who can assist individuals to understand the impact returning to work would have on their disability benefits, as well as Medicaid and or Medicare. For many people living with HIV, it will be an important early step to have an assessment of their individual combination of benefits and assistance to gain an understanding of their various options and strategies that can become part of a well-informed decision-making process related to employment. Many of you may know this, some may not, but in recent years, there's been a major shift of workforce development funding to support services and training programs located in community colleges. And their broad range of resources are extremely valuable to learn about and may benefit many people living with HIV. As just one example, people who may have struggled with learning disabilities throughout their life can access a range of supports and accommodations in community colleges that can make successful learning experiences possible, sometimes first ever positive school experiences, and deeply meaningful accomplishment of major milestones such as high school equivalency and other certificates and degrees. In Connecticut, many people with limited income, including older people, are eligible to attend community colleges for free. Some of the best adult basic education programs can be found in the Connecticut State Community College system, which includes Hartford's Capital Community College. These programs include literacy, English for speakers of other languages, and very specific job training and certification programs directly developed in partnership with employers seeking to hire those who successfully complete them.
Capital Workforce Partners American Job Centers are hubs in greater Hartford communities of the National American Job Centers Workforce Development System, including both online resources and in-person career centers located in all communities across the state. The career centers are open to all, with no need to disclose HIV status to utilize its core resources. In some communities, HIV service providers have found and cultivated productive relationships with interested, engaged staff in their local career centers, much to the benefit of the people living with HIV that they serve. Career centers provide free access to job search and career development services and resources, including assessment, training and education, job leads and employer connections, and referral to a broad range of community partners. We will email a resource guide to each of you after today's webinar that will include the link you see on this slide, which you can use to find your local career centers. You can also contact us for help in locating career centers for your communities. The Career Connect program was created in response to the COVID pandemic to help people get back to work and in better jobs than they had before the pandemic. The free training programs that are made available through Career Connect are typically short-term, from 5 to 20 weeks long. Participants may receive a variety of career and supportive services and resources that may be essential for navigating a transition through training into quality employment. These could include transportation, childcare, housing, food, technology, benefits counseling, stipends, and a range of other services needed to participate in the training activities and also care for their family during their participation. The Department of Mental Health and Services, the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, known as DMAS, has developed access to a range of services and support for participants to plan and pursue goals for employment as part of their health care. Working with a number of agencies around the state, DMAS makes available more services, including career planning, assistance with job search, job placement, and coaching for workers both on the job and off the job to help develop and sustain success at work. In addition, DMA's employment services include vital career advancement services. And now to one of my favorite programs, which is the Ticket to Work program. With no HIV-specific employment services in Hartford, it is especially valuable to learn about key local resources that can address employment needs, like the Adult Education Center, BRS, Capital Community College, the Capital Workforce Partners, American Job Centers, Career Connect, DMAS, and also the nationwide Ticket to Work program. The Ticket to Work program of the Social Security Administration was created to help SSI and or SSDI beneficiaries with a disability to achieve self-determined employment goals. Services made available through the Ticket to Work program can include vocational rehabilitation, training, referrals, job coaching, benefits counseling, employment counseling, and job placement services. Social Security will suspend continuing disability reviews, or CDRs, while beneficiaries are using their ticket, and they are continuing to make progress using their ticket on their plan for employment. So I actually had a great experience with the Ticket to Work program. Locally here in Norfolk, Virginia, I assigned my ticket to what's known as an employment network, which is an agency that has been vetted by the Social Security Administration to provide services to disability beneficiaries. I then went on over a couple of years to run that program, and it's a wonderful opportunity for individuals who have been on disability to make an attempt to go back to work and see how working will affect them without losing their cash benefit and without losing their medical benefits initially or immediately, because we all understand that in order to work, so many of us will need to continue to get our medical benefits. Many times, some of us are not as interested in the ramifications of losing our cash benefit as we are as losing our medical benefits. While both are very, very important, I think it's really, really wonderful that this program will allow us to keep some of our benefits. And now we'll go back to Mark.
Thanks so much, Sil. So you're joining us today to consider the information and concepts presented in this webinar may represent a door opening for people living with HIV you work with and who are served in the programs and agencies that you work in. We understand that this focus may feel extra on top of an already full workload, and we are truly grateful to you for exploring this realm with us. Now let's explore the potential of opening doors. More people living with HIV may gain the hopefulness and motivation to prepare for and participate in employment if they could be more well-informed about work earnings and benefits. They could gain access to basic to advanced training and education. They could build their work-related skills and confidence and gain access to job search assistance and find real pathways into work, into quality work, such as in the HIV workforce, where they can bring their whole selves, including lived experience and expertise. Although it's important to realize that working within the HIV workforce is great for some folks, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. And for some folks, job goals may be in a multitude of directions, and we should not, under no circumstances should we be pushing folks to all go down the same path. It is indeed the case that in their work with people living with HIV, service providers who've expanded their focus to identify employment needs, interests, and questions, and have learned about matching resources for information, services, and resources may forever beneficially alter and enhance the trajectories of the lives of people that they assist. Now I'll turn it back over to Sylvester.
Thank you, Mark. Here's a way for HIV service providers of thinking about beginning in a very small way to introduce exploration of employment needs, interests, and questions. First, in meetings with people living with HIV, ask very simply, do you need help? Such as information, services, or resources to be able to get a job, to return to work, to keep your current job, or to change it. What is it that you need? As a level 2 question, moving a bit further and going a little bit deeper to potentially share information for consideration, you could ask, do you know about? And you could name information, services, and resources related to, as some examples, benefits, legal rights and protections, training or education, workforce development, vocational rehabilitation, self-employment, and small business development. These steps may hold invaluable potential of opening doors for people living with HIV that you work with who may not have often found or often find doors open for them in their lives. And now we'll go back to Mark. Excuse me.
Sylvester, thank you. It may not be everyone who's joined us in this webinar today, but many, if not most of you, include some or a lot of focus in your work currently on the quality of life, the economic well-being, as well as the mental health and physical health of people living with HIV. While you may not have often had employment needs or options at the center of your focus in working with people, I'd guess that most of us assembled here today include physical health, mental health, economic well-being, and quality of life of people living with HIV very prominently in our work. We'd greatly appreciate hearing your thoughts and discussion about the potential value that you see of HIV service providers helping increase access for people living with HIV to employment-related information, services, and resources. And by extension, expanding employment opportunities for people living with HIV. This question for discussion has multiple parts, and we would tremendously welcome any of you to just take a stab at it. You have particular expertise and experience potentially in specific areas of focus. I would like to ask you to sort of put on your thinking cap for considering how could being able to access assistance with employment benefit the quality of life of people living with HIV? How could being able to access assistance with employment benefit the economic status of people living with HIV? How could it benefit the mental health, the physical health of people living with HIV? I'm curious if anybody would be willing to come off mute and share your unfiltered thoughts. Just take a stab at it. There's no bad answers. I'm very curious to hear what occurs to any of you today.
Okay, so I'll take a stab at it, get things rolling. Quality of life, I feel like assistance related to employment regarding the quality of life, it will open people's eyes to really be reminded of what they already contribute. Because I don't feel that a person is not contributing to quality of their life and their neighbor's life simply because they are unemployed. I think I think that's harmful and it can be detrimental. However, being realistic, I can see why a person would feel their quality of life is better. Economic status, really black and white, you would be positively contributing to the economy of your community, municipality, state, so on and so forth. Especially in the arts too. A lot of people don't realize that the arts and culture space really makes up about 30% of the economy, which is a way bigger number than I ever thought it would be. Mental health, we talked about that earlier. Um, it just all around helps people's mental health, even if you are not diagnosed with HIV or any ailment. That feeling that you get when you get a job, it's undescribable. So you would just have that constantly. And then physical health, depending on what role you get, you're more active. You're more active. You may think twice about ordering that extra double cheeseburger. I'm not there yet. I will still probably order the second one. But what happens is you start to think about things differently. So you get the job, then you go to your case manager or your doctor, be like, you know what? I got a job. I'm in a good place, and then the domino effect goes in a positive way. And yeah, that's what I got.
Brendan, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Sure, sure.
And I want to I want to encourage that we not be concerned about the impact that individuals would have externally. I'm interested in the benefits for that individual, the person living with HIV. Anyone else have any thoughts that haven't been mentioned already?
So what I've had the pleasure of seeing, not just for myself, but other folk that I've worked with living with HIV over the years is, you know, just the access for the economic status, it's access to home ownership. And a lot of times our people living with HIV, they're depending on their income, and and it maybe shouldn't be that way, but they're not spoken to as far as home ownership. It's always about getting a Section 8 certificate or some type of housing voucher. But once you work, you're in a position to be able to do that. You're learning more things. It is access to better health care. You know, when you have private insurance over state-sponsored insurances, which can address your mental health, not just for you, but it's been a great thing for me and my children as far as their mental health, you know, because they had some issues, but they always had access to the best care because I work with a certain type of insurance. And of course, that affects your physical health because you have access to better health care. I mean, you know, economics is the cusp of all of these social determinants or things that kind of get in the way of better health. And of course, quality of life. I've been able to afford to have a hobby. I ride motorcycles, and it costs, you know what I'm saying? Harleys cost, and not just with me, people who go hiking and all those other things that helps them go outside of just you know, those basic needs, but those things that really increases internal quality. So yeah, definitely it's a roundabout thing to talk to people about, to talk to our clients about, because they're not phantoming any of this stuff, you know. So for them to be able to dream like that, they need to know that they can do it. So and it's done economically. I mean, point blank, period. So.
Mark, just a quick comment about mental health. So many times people living with HIV isolate, right? Especially as we start to get older. Having access to employment information gives us the opportunity to get out, to be around people, and to have a reason to get up in the morning. This in turn affects or enhances our physical health and also enhances our quality of life, because so many of us feel like we don't have a reason to get up in the morning, right? So being able to have access to information that allows us to know that we can get out and do something with ourselves is a great opportunity.
Can I just add to that, you know, just to add to what you said, Sylvester, it's the social component that's also really, really important. You know, being out and being able to communicate with other people. We as human beings are social animals. And whether we're introverted or extroverted, being around, like being isolated, creates more issues in of itself, right? But if we're able to get out and be around people and get used to being around people, it enriches not just our external lives, it enriches our internal lives, you know? So that would be one of the biggest, and that is connected to the mental health component, you know, that enrichment of being around a diverse group of people. It helps us function better.
Mm-hmm.
What deep, rich insight folks are sharing here. I really tremendously appreciate it. Danielle, thank you. Ruth, thank you. Sylvester, thank you. I realize I should probably move us along, but so very much appreciate all of your insights. I again want to say that I do not want anyone to take away the message that there's a cheerleading in belief that everyone's going to benefit from taking a job, any job, that there's one certainty that will be true for everybody in considering work. What I would personally want to encourage is that everybody have a chance to get access to information and support for just considering work. And most people have had a pretty limited opportunity to really know about the wealth of resources in the greater Hartford area that they could consider and take advantage of. And for every percentage of people living with HIV in Hartford that could possibly take that encouragement, that support, that information, and those resources and make change that they are happy about in their own life, I think that would be a success of our collective work. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvester for the next slide.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for your comments. So I'm going to review 2 slides with links to further information and resources we've discussed today. Shortly after today's webinar, we will send you an email with a resource guide, including these links and a full set of today's slides. The first resource here is for the Adult Education Center, especially valuable for obtaining high school equivalency diplomas and for English as a second language classes. Also, there's BRS, or the Bureau of Rehabilitative Services, which is the state of Connecticut's vocational rehabilitation agency. It can provide a wide variety of information, services, and resources to eligible people with disabilities to consider, prepare for, obtain, and maintain employment, and to advance in employment. BRS is also an important and rare resource for benefits counseling for SSI and/or SSDI beneficiaries through its Connect to Work project. The last link you see here is for Capital Community College, located in Hartford, as one of the campuses of the Connecticut State Community College system, and a vital resource for short-term vocational and continuing education, as well as certification and associate's degree programs. Capital Workforce Partners, American Job Centers, are hubs in our communities of the National American Job Centers Workforce Development System, including both online resources and in-person career centers located in communities across the state, with several locations around the greater Hartford area. Career Connect makes short-term job training available and can include a range of vital supportive services and resources that can make participation possible and successful. DEMAS funds employment services programs providing vital job search and job placement services and supports. And finally, the Ticket to Work program of the Social Security Administration was created to help SSI and/or SSDI beneficiaries with a disability to achieve self-determined employment goals. And now I'll turn it over to Mark for our closing.
Thank you so much, Sylvester. This is our final slide, and I do want to just say, and I'm going to post it in chat right now, we would be most grateful to you for taking a quick moment before you move on with your day to complete our very brief post-webinar evaluation survey. We've made it very brief so that it's painless, we hope, to pretty quickly give us a snapshot of your thoughts about this training, this webinar, and this project. The link that just posted in the chat will also be emailed to you directly, along with additional information and resources. We're going to share the slides from today's webinar. We're going to share a resource list. It's really a mini resource guide based on resources that we covered and related resources that'll also be attached in the email. And we'll also include a flyer for the June 7th event for people living with HIV. And we absolutely hope that you will encourage every person living with HIV that you come in contact with between now and June 7th to take advantage of this event on June 7th. I really want it to be clear that it is not intended only for folks who are ready to look for work this week and start talking to employers. It's intended for folks who may be interested in work, but at some time in the future. And it's also intended for folks who have no certainty at all that they plan to go to work, but might be interested in just collecting information and hearing some of the strategies that folks have utilized and lessons learned to possibly consider at some point later down the road. For more information about this training initiative or to join our email list to be kept informed about our webinars and activities, please email your request to Brendan D. Colbert at bcolbert@act-ct.org. As mentioned earlier, we will send you a follow-up email following this webinar, including today's slides and a mini resource guide. I want to express my super deep thanks and appreciation to Sylvester and to our fearless and valiant leader, Brendan Colbert, and also major thanks to the amazing Jill Larmette from Capital Workforce Partners and Ellen Econs, who works with both DEMAS and BRS. Jill and Ellen are among the extraordinary team who've worked on developing this project with Advancing Connecticut together, and I hope you all get the opportunity to work with them both. I especially want to thank all of you who joined us today to increase your knowledge about opportunities to increase and improve employment opportunities for all people living with HIV in the greater Hartford area who need and want them. And with that, it is now 11:28. We'll post the link again in chat for completing our super brief online evaluation survey. We'll greatly appreciate if you can do that very quickly before you move on with your day. Sylvester and I are also going to stay here for several minutes to allow folks to get that link to respond, and we will welcome any questions or comments that anybody has. I hope this has been helpful and interesting, and I'm really super excited to be working with the community of folks there in Hartford to really make some change in the community to enhance access to opportunities for employment and economic advancement of people living with HIV.